Want to stay up to date with everything that's happening on the show? Or do you have a story that you'd like to submit for one of our Listener Stories episodes? You can get in touch with the show via the website at www.hauntedukpodcast.com, on Instagram at hauntedukpodcast, on X at hauntedukpod, or you can email us at contactus@hauntedukpodcast.com. We're also on Facebook and TikTok. And if you want to support the show, you can do it via either Patreon or Ko-fi. Both platforms have exactly the same content, but work in slightly different ways. One of the advantages of Patreon is its sleek user interface, but if you want to avoid those pesky additional charges Apple, Google, and Patreon apply to your subscription, then why not give Ko-fi a try? Simply open a browser window and type ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast. That's Ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast, and you'll soon find us. Whichever platform you choose, we're sure you'll enjoy the bonus content. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the episode. One night, in the early hours of the morning, I was suddenly awoken, and believe me, I was wide awake, with the realization that something was standing in the doorway of my bedroom. The interesting part was, although I couldn't see what it was, my back was to the doorway, I sensed or somehow knew it was part human, part animal. I don't know how I knew this, but I did. If I could describe it better, it was human, but much more animal-like, a kind of low-level creature. And obviously, the feeling I got from this thing was not friendly or pleasant. This is episode 60, part 3 of the Haunted UK podcast, and we're back again full to the very rafters with your incredible stories. So join us, but proceed with caution and maybe find somewhere to hide, because we are about to come face to face with the thing and other listener stories. As usual, the response from all of you fantastic listeners has been phenomenal. So many stories and experiences, so many elements of the paranormal, and all brilliant. A huge thank you to each and every single one of you who have taken the time out to type up your stories and send them into the show. And let's remember, it's never easy to share a story about the supernatural or paranormal. It takes courage and some vulnerability. Some of these stories are unsettling, the kind that make you question reality, particularly our closing story, The Thing, which will haunt my thoughts for quite some time. So for these listeners to live with these experiences quietly and then to disclose them, well, that takes some courage. So let's start with our first story in Salford, Greater Manchester, where you don't want to look in the mirror too closely, especially in the dark, and neither do you want to stay at the top of the stairs. Hi there. I've recently discovered your podcast and have been binge listening ever since. It's fabulous. I tend to listen whilst working in the garden or doing my housework. It makes the time fly by. Thank you so much for a brilliant show. I thought I'd tell you about my experience when I was a teenager. I was about 10 and my brother was 4 years old when my family moved into a semi-detached 3-bedroom house in Salford, Greater Manchester. This was around 1968 when we moved in, and we lived there until the late 1970s. The house was lovely, much better than where we had previously lived, and we were all very happy there. I think it had been built possibly around the 1930s, judging by the style, and we were told that it had once been the residence and place of work of a local GP. Every one of us used to have a strange feeling when either climbing or descending the stairs, sometimes feeling as if we were being pushed, and in fact my mum did fall down the stairs once and broke her ankle. My mum told me that she'd spoken to an old neighbour who told her that someone had taken their own life by hanging in our own house some time before. But we have never been able to corroborate this. I would never look in the bathroom mirror when the light was off. Well, I always felt that I would see something behind me if I did. My brother John used to have a recurring dream about a big man with twirling eyes. The kind like when an aeroplane engine goes round and round and you see a never-ending spiral. This man staring at him. He had this dream a lot. I never liked being in the house alone. Random things would also go missing and eventually turn up in the strangest of places, or where we'd searched previously. One time, we were playing a board game on a coffee table, and the dice rolled off the table and literally disappeared. We even lifted the armchairs and sofa, thinking it had rolled underneath, but it was nowhere to be found. Eventually, it turned up days later in another part of the house. Another time, my grandfather's war medals went missing. They were usually kept in a small tin, which we found to be empty. We searched high and low and couldn't find them. They reappeared days later, balanced on top of the sitting room window pelmet, which was much too high for either my brother or myself to reach. I wish I could have found out if someone had committed suicide in that house, but I don't know how to go about it. Strangely enough, the house we lived in before this one was a very old cottage, which was in the grounds of a very large house that had been converted into bedsits. It was a very spooky house, and I think my parents were quite glad to leave there. Over the years, both properties, I believe, had been allowed to fall into disrepair, and I think the cottage had been boarded up. The strange thing is that I heard that a few years ago, and a long time after we'd left, a young girl had broken into the cottage and taken her own life by hanging herself. I always wonder if something followed us from the cottage to our new house. I'll never know. Again, thank you so much for a brilliant podcast, and keep up the good work. Julie White. Thank you so much, Julie. The coincidence between the possible sad events in both houses is troubling and feels significant. Eerie, certainly. After speaking to Julie about this experience, she kindly revealed more unsettling stories which happened in the early 1980s. Julie continues, I thought I would tell you about another couple of experiences I had in the past. The first one was when I was living in a bedsit room in an old large terraced house in the student area of Manchester in the early 1980s. The whole house was split up into several bed-sitting rooms, and they were all occupied by ladies. I wasn't a student, but the rest of the girls were, and we all got on really well. We would gather in each other's rooms or go out for nights out together. I had a few really bad dreams whilst there. One is still very vivid. I woke up in my dream to see all of the appliances, cooker, fridge, TV, etc., swirling around as if they were in a vortex. I ran upstairs to use the phone on the next landing to ring my boyfriend to come and help me, but the dial on the phone just kept going round and round. I looked over at the banister to see the entrance to my room, and a massive pool of blood was seeping out from under the door. Thankfully, I woke up at that point and didn't go back to sleep all that night. But then there was another night, and I did wake up this time, and wish I hadn't. Standing near the foot of the bed, I could see a little girl with her back to me. My room had a bay window with a small table and chairs, and the girl seemed to be standing on one of the chairs looking out of the window. She had pigtails and a big bow on the back of her dress. I was staring at her and couldn't take my eyes off her. I was trying to reach for the lamp to turn it on, but couldn't seem to find the switch. I turned away for a second to find the switch, and when I looked back, she'd gone. I couldn't sleep for the rest of that night either. I never experienced anything else, but never felt comfortable if I was in the house alone, and was glad when I finally left. Years later, I went on an evening coach trip out with members of a flower arranging club. We were visiting the house and garden of a gentleman who used to give flower arranging demonstrations to the club. His house was very beautiful, and an old cottage full of antiques, and seemed to be very cozy and welcoming. The garden was a lovely, typical cottage garden, and it was a pleasure to look around. He was happy for us to have a look around the house too. After exploring downstairs, I made my way upstairs. As I said before, the cottage seemed very cozy and had a lovely welcoming atmosphere. But when I got near the top of the stairs, the atmosphere changed. I would have immediately turned and gone straight back down, as I felt really uncomfortable, but there were other people coming up behind me. As soon as I could, I went back down, and I could not wait to leave, to get out of there. I remember thinking I would walk home if they were to say we had to stay the night. The house owner told us all later that the house was haunted, and that the ghost quite often would walk across the top of the stairs, which is exactly where I felt it. I was glad to leave there that night. Thank you again for a brilliant podcast. Kindest regards, Julie. Thank you, Julie, for these fascinating stories. It seems to me that you must be sensitive to energy around you, and very interesting that in the flower arranging house you felt something strange once again, at the top of the stairs. And with that, let's move on to our next listener story. Hi Steve. First of all, I would like to request that I remain anonymous. I live in Bournemouth and not much paranormal stuff happens here, but there are a few rumours that used to do the rounds. Today, I have a few short stories for you. I don't believe in the paranormal, but I'm an open-minded skeptic. I've been listening to your podcast for well over a year now, and I love it. It's nice to hear someone talk about the unknown in a way that's not just believable, but serious as well. My favourite episodes, besides the listener stories, are the ones about doppelgangers and the episodes about the vertical plane. Keep up the good work. I listen to it while I'm at work. One of the perks of being a cleaner, you can just shove your earphones in and get on with it. My first mini-story is something that happened to me in January that I still can't explain. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, probably very early morning, and not being able to move. It was like I was being held down to my bed, but I couldn't see anyone in there with me. There was a bright light in the corner of my room that seemed to be too light to be from the crack in the blinds. I tried my best to turn onto my side, but it was like I was magnetically attracted to the spot. I managed to turn to the side of the bed that faced the wall after a short while, and when I did, the force stopped and the light went. I thought it was over, but then I heard my door open. This really creeped me out, and I fought the urge to look. Then I got curious and looked anyway. There was nothing there, and my door was closed, so it couldn't have been one of my cats. There has never been anything out of the ordinary in this house before, so I didn't really know what to think. Now for my next story. My family has a history with spiritualism, and my granddad used to do readings. He talks about it a lot when I visit him, and I find it absolutely fascinating. He says that without asking questions, you can somehow get a picture of the deceased person in your head. However, he has ominously been right about a few things. He has said things in the past that we all just took as him merely messing around, but then they came true. For example, years ago before I was born, my granddad was having a conversation with my mum, and how they got onto the conversation he can't remember, but my granddad mentioned that my nan would die suddenly before the age of 60. Well, my nan died suddenly of a heart attack about 10 years ago, at the age of 58. In that same conversation, he said that one of my aunties would die of stomach cancer before the age of 50. Well, she's recently been complaining about problems with her stomach, and she's currently 46. Could all be coincidence, or maybe something else. When I was a child, unfortunately things weren't great at home, but strange things would happen, such as having my hair pulled and small stuff like that. However, my mum tells me all the time that when I was a toddler, I used to talk to something that no one else could see. I would start crying and say to her, "He's ignoring me." He, I think, may refer to my twin brother, who unfortunately didn't survive. When I was 11, I was taken into foster care, and all of the activity stopped and hasn't ever happened again. It seems that it had something to do with me. However, it could of course have been a coincidence. Who knows? But I'm glad it's over. To this day, we can't explain any of this. Keep up the good work. After talking to our listener some more about these strange, unsettling experiences, he revealed he had a few more occurrences in his life, and they are fascinating. He continues, "Morning, Steve. I think I'll just get right into my stories. I think I may have something similar to my granddad, although I don't think I can predict the future or anything like that. However, there have been plenty of times where I've just known things were going to happen before they did. I'll give you a few examples. When I was a child, I used to dream that I was in the back of someone's car. I don't know whose, and we would be driving down a road which led to a dead end at the end of the road, and there was a house. The creepy thing is, it's the exact same house I now live in with my foster parents, and I think you have already guessed that the road, in reality, led to a dead end. There was also a small wood next to it, and a tall brick wall next to the road blocking it from the view of the motorway opposite, which I also saw in the dream. How could I dream about a house? And the houses down the road are all different, by the way, hence why I could easily recognize this house specifically. How could I dream about this house that I'd never been in, years before I was placed there? Baffles me to this day because of how bizarre it was. A few years ago, I was hit by a car. I was fine. I didn't even break a bone, which is odd, because the doctor said that it should have killed me. I was very lucky, and it made me more alert when crossing the road. Admittedly, the collision was my fault, as I wasn't looking where I was going. Suppose God gave me a second chance. But the thing that scared me the most wasn't the fact that I could have died. I've never really been scared of dying since I can't stop it. It's two things. The first is that when I woke up that morning, I had a horrible feeling in my gut, and I couldn't explain it, but I knew something bad was going to happen. And well, as I said, I was hit by a car just over an hour later. The second thing is that when I was hit, I got this crazy feeling like it had happened before. But I knew it hadn't. I mean, you aren't going to forget such a traumatic event, are you? I still think about it 3 years later. It doesn't cause me any distress, just great curiosity and confusion. Years ago, before I was born, my granddad was seriously ill due to the point where he couldn't get out of bed and was coughing up blood. He thought he was near his end. However, one night, he was having a particularly bad episode where he said he saw a light come from outside his room. It was blinding, and it kept getting brighter and brighter until he couldn't look anymore. As sudden as it appeared, it was gone. Now, he was told that this illness would most probably kill him, but 3 days later, miraculously, he was better. This isn't the first time it happened to him, and it had happened to him once previously. And both times he made it through. He's convinced to this day that he'd seen an angel that helped him, possibly his guardian angel. And in all honesty, I believe him. It really was a miracle. My final story. I mentioned previously that I was one of a twin, but he didn't survive. Well, a few weeks after our birth, my mum had a picture taken of herself in our lounge area. I don't know who took the picture, but scarily, and I refuse to look at the picture again to this day because of how much it creeps me out. Scarily to the left of my mum, at shoulder length, is a figure. Even more terrifying, it was my brother. Now, I'm aware that the photo could have been edited, but why would she do that? Also, this was mid-2004. Photo editing was not that advanced back then. For years, my mum and my siblings would report hearing voices or having their hair tugged at, only for them to turn around and there be nothing there. There were rumours around the area that a young girl had died around the area years before, but that was never confirmed. So, could she have something to do with this? Given the lack of evidence, though, she was probably just an urban legend. There had also been anomalies in other photos like orbs, though that was probably just dust, and balls of light. My mum's cat would never act up though, so I don't know what to think. There used to always be times when I could swear that I could hear whispering around the house. But that could have just been auditory pareidolia, and I am mildly autistic and have sensitive hearing, which could also be a factor. I don't know. I'll leave that for others to decide. I hope you and the listeners enjoy my stories, and I can't wait to hear you retell them. Again, thank you for the podcast. It's truly amazing. Kind regards. Thank you so much for sharing these intriguing experiences. What struck me is the similarity between your granddad's experience of the blinding light and your own in your first story. And people and places being realized into real life from dreams always fascinates me. And we would love to hear more from others who've had experiences like this too. Have you ever dreamt about an unknown place, only to go there in real life? We'd love to hear from you. On to our next listener. Hi there. I thought I'd share some of my own experiences with you. I've had lots. When I first met my husband John in 1997, he rented a flat. It wasn't a tenement, it was an upper villa in a typical street in the Inch area in Edinburgh. I used to stay over on the weekend if we'd been out on the town, but I never really felt comfortable there. There was an odd feeling about the place, and we'd both often hear what sounded like someone moving around in the kitchen, but there'd be no one there. And if I had to go to the bathroom, I'd run as I always felt uncomfortable in the hall. One morning, John had to go into work for a few hours. I was awake when he left. He went out of the upstairs door, down the internal stone steps, and out of the front door at the bottom, which I locked behind him. Then I went straight back to bed. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I'm positive I wasn't sleeping. About 10 minutes passed when I heard a key in the door downstairs, and the door opened. My first thought was, we must have forgotten something, and I waited for him to come upstairs. However, as I listened to the footsteps, I realized it wasn't my husband. They continued up to the internal door, which I heard open, and then I felt that whoever it was that had opened the bedroom door, which was right next to the top of the stairs, was now standing there looking at me. I was facing the bedroom door, but the covers were up to my face, so I couldn't see, and I was so terrified I couldn't move to see who it was. Moments passed, maybe a minute or so, then the room just felt different. I can't quite put it into words, but the place felt normal again, and I felt there was no one there anymore. Gradually, I was able to come out from under the covers, and sure enough, no one was there. It took me a good while to feel brave enough to get out from under the covers and get out of bed, during which time I heard no other movement. The bedroom and the door to the stairs were closed, and although I was still scared, I somehow mustered the courage to go through the flat, checking all the rooms. There was no one there. I went down to the front door, and it was still locked. I went back to bed and sat there until my husband came back from work. The first thing he said to me was, "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told him what had happened, and he listened. We'd talked before about the feeling in the flat, but he told me that he had experienced a few things too. Several times when he'd come back from work, the gas fire would be on, and on one occasion, he woke in the night to see a dark shadow at the foot of his bed. I was delighted and relieved when we moved out. We had more experiences in our next home in East Lothian. We moved into this flat in 1999. The building was, at the time, about 70 years old and had originally been built as fishermen's flats. In the time we lived there were several strange occurrences. About 6 months after we moved in, I woke in the night. It was dark and I couldn't physically see anything, but in my mind, I could clearly see and feel an old lady in the room, pottering around, going in and out of drawers, perhaps looking for something. All of a sudden, I felt a weight on the bed as she sat down. I could feel her presence pressed against me. After a moment, I got a bit scared and kicked out my leg, at which point she was gone, and the room was normal again. Another time, I'd been having an afternoon snooze on the sofa. I'd woken being aware that someone was standing behind the sofa bending over towards me, but I was too sleepy to turn my head. I assumed it had been my husband and that he'd gone away realizing that I was sleeping. However, when I asked him later what he wanted when he'd come through, he looked confused and said he hadn't come into the living room at all that afternoon. There wasn't anyone else in the house. When my son was around 3 years old, he was playing in the living room and I was in my bedroom putting washing away. No one else was at home. He came through and asked me who the man was in the living room. I asked what man. He said it was an old man in a cozy jumper. I asked was he a nice man, and he said yes. He then skipped off into his own room. I obviously went into the living room to check, but as expected, there was no one there. He never mentioned it again and has no recollection of it. We had lots of other low-level things happen. For example, the living room door was glazed so you could see through it, and often we'd be sure someone had walked past it into the hall, or I'd be in the kitchen, which was at the end of the hall, and I'd look up thinking someone was there, but there never was. Occasionally, the TV would switch on, and in the night, once our son's baby activity table started playing music for no obvious reason. These events never really scared us that much. We just accepted them and lived with them, often joking that anything odd that happened was just the ghost. We lived in the flat for over 20 years, and after our children were born, the activity gradually settled down, and at the time we moved out, nothing had really happened for years. I've often wondered if any of the new residents experienced anything at all. Although I said I've never really felt scared in the flat, I did have some experiences which did frighten me, but I've convinced myself it was sleep paralysis. So perhaps it was nothing paranormal, but I thought it was still worth sharing in case any of your listeners have had a similar experience. It happened several times, and it always happened in the morning when I was on my own. On my day off, my husband would leave for work and I would sleep on for a bit before getting up. At some point during this time, I would be woken up by what I can only describe as huge beating wings. I would then feel like someone or something was right beside me, watching me. I'd be terrified, but despite trying my hardest, I couldn't open my eyes to look and see who or what it was. This is why I think it was sleep paralysis, but I'm really not sure. I don't know what happened after that. I must have fallen asleep again, but I would wake up later and everything would be okay. This happened numerous times, always in the same way. It was terrifying, but hasn't happened for years now. In our new home, in the same town in East Lothian, I wouldn't say I've ever felt a presence as such. Although my son thinks there's something in the attic, I've never felt it. But on one occasion, I'd lost a special earring I'd been wearing and searched all over for it, only to find it on the carpet right in front of me after I'd asked out loud, "Please help me find my earring." Coincidence? Maybe, but I like to think not. I'm a firm believer in the spirit world. Keep the podcasts coming. I absolutely love listening to them. Thanks, Susan. Thank you so much. What an interesting array of experiences. I can imagine there's probably nothing much scarier than hearing footsteps in your home when you're alone. Susan, we would encourage you to take part in our sleep paralysis study with Northumbria University. Please contact the show. We would love you to take part in our survey with the university. And likewise, anyone else who feels they may have experienced sleep paralysis, please get in touch. We can provide a link to the survey. It's such a fascinating phenomenon. And thank you so much to all listeners who have contacted the show so far to take part in this important study. And now, we cross to the other side of the world to New Zealand and Japan for some truly remarkable experiences. Over to our listener, Shinji. Hello, I love your podcast, and recently I've been going through a lot of issues with work and my own mental health, which has been very troubling. Then I found your podcast, and amazingly, your stories and the listener stories have helped me, scared me, and made me think. Thank you. I thought I'd just like to share some of my own experiences that I've had over the years. My very first experience of feeling very uneasy and things not being right was when I was around 7, which would have been in 1982. My father was an engineer, and where he used to work was, well, frightening. It was in the basement engine room of an old building near the old area of Auckland Harbour. I think the building had been around from about the 1900s. He would make me go down into the area down some narrow wooden stairs. It was something I hated and never felt right. I don't know if there was anything to my fears, but since then I've had trouble going to engine rooms, especially in ships. Another time when I was 7, I knew of a house near where I lived in Auckland that was vacant. I knew no one was there. My friend and I were on our bikes, and as we were passing this house, I felt something that made me turn. I will never know why, but as I turned, I saw an old man. There was no color to him except he was faintly grey, and he was about to walk up some stairs. This house had a window next to the front door, so you could see if someone would use the stairs. He had his hand on the balustrade before walking up the stairs. When he turned his head, and just held my gaze for 3 to 5 seconds. It scared me, but made me think why. Why did he look at me? I couldn't figure it out, and for a long time after that, I wouldn't go near that house. I never saw him again or found out what may have happened in that house, although I don't think he was malicious. Many years after that, I really had no issues with seeing what I thought were paranormal activity, until I moved to Japan. They say Japan is a very active country when it comes to displaced souls and strange paranormal activity. I know of a friend of mine who went through an old tunnel which didn't have lights in his car. This was in central Japan in a region called Gifu. Suddenly his car lost all power and just stopped in this tunnel. It was night and there was no ambient light. He felt like he was stuck there for 5 minutes or more, but it was only a few seconds. As suddenly as his car stopped and nothing worked, it suddenly came to life, and he found he could get out of the tunnel. The tunnel is near a winding river road where people have lost their lives in crashes, crashing from the road and into the river. People say that the road and tunnel he went through is haunted. But the clearest and strangest thing that happened to me was in 2019. It happened in Shinjuku in Tokyo. I just returned to work after taking time off for depression when I had to attend the store leadership meeting. When I arrived at the building where the meeting was going to take place, I felt a sense of sadness, and the building and meeting room didn't feel right. When I sit in a room, I normally need to sit as far away from the door as possible and need my back in a corner or where I can see the whole room. During the meeting, I saw a man who was about 180 centimeters suddenly appear behind my colleagues across the room from me. I saw him walk about 3 meters behind my mates and just stop. He just turned and looked at me. He was in a suit, but the cut was late 80s. He was grey, and I could see his whole body. No one else saw him or felt anything. I held his gaze for what felt like a lifetime, but probably was only about 5 seconds, and then he turned and kept walking and disappeared. As I was going through mental health issues, I was scared to tell anyone what I saw. But I finally opened up to one of my colleagues who understands me. She didn't laugh or anything. She just said that she felt uneasy too about the meeting place. In Japan, there is a word jikobuken, which literally means a place where something bad has occurred. By bad, it could be a death, suicide, or worse. Apparently, this meeting room the GM had booked was the closest to our store and the cheapest, yet it had the best equipment. I feel even now, 5 years later, that the spirit I saw in that room met with an untimely death in that room. I was never able to find out what could have happened there, but after my experience, my friend chose to share what she and others felt uneasy about, and thankfully, the GM decided never to use that place again. Your podcast is amazing. Please keep up the great work. This is the first time I've written down my experiences. Just being able to write them down helps me. Thank you for listening. Shinji, Auckland, New Zealand. We chatted to Shinji some more about his life and experiences, and he went on to tell us the following. I'm a firm believer that there is something out there. As a little boy, I always remember my mother telling me not to take stones or rocks home and leave them in the house, as she believed spirits, good or bad, found it easy to attach themselves to those items, and it could bring bad luck to the house. My background is the following. I'm English, which is my father's side, and his parents were born in Norwich and London, and my mother is Japanese. Although my father and I were born in New Zealand, I've always felt a connection with the UK. I've just remembered one other story about an area of Auckland that is one of the older established areas in the 19th century. There used to be a cafe called Java House, and it was situated in an old bakery. Apparently behind this bakery was stables and accommodation, and sometime in the mid to late 19th century, there was a fire which burnt down the whole accommodation. A young woman in her 20s unhappily lost her life. The former owner of the cafe said sometimes she could be seen in their cafe as a grey lady walking upstairs, or in the area that was the stables, which is now apartments. She sometimes can be seen sitting in the corner of a bedroom, just looking at the people sleeping. Because her life was taken away so suddenly, I think her spirit hasn't yet been able to find a way to detach herself from the area. The area where this apparition may be seen is Devonport. This will seem very strange, but since listening to your stories and the stories from other people on your podcast, I've been inspired to look at writing a children's book entitled Who Am I? Looking at my life of being of mixed heritage and not really knowing where I belonged or which era. I have a closer affiliation to the early 20th century than I do of modern times. By chance, I met a woman, I'm a hotelier, who was a guest who started talking about identity as if she was meant to be talking to me at that point in time. When I told her my idea, she instantly said, "Do it." And it made me wonder why I did meet her in that moment. Why did I think of doing that after listening to one of your podcasts? I even had written notes which I shared with her. Thank you again for reading my stories, and keep doing amazing things. Shinji, Auckland, New Zealand. Shinji, thank you so much for sharing these moments and stories with us, and we are very humbled to think that maybe the podcast gave you a flash of inspiration to write your children's book. And we wish you all the best with this creative venture, and I like how you met this woman at that very point, but also how she imparted that advice to you. Synchronicity can be a beautiful thing. What's also interesting are the parallels between the two apparitions you saw, that they were both grey and made a point of making eye contact with you, interacting with you, staring at you. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you again, Shinji. Our next listener, Rachel, has written in to tell us about divine intervention. Hello there. Long-time listener here. Absolutely love the podcast. I was listening to some older podcasts today, and I couldn't help but reach out about divine intervention. I was a young teenager around the age of 14 when this happened. I've always had, as my mum calls it, powers. I am able to tell if a phone will ring, who it will be. I know when someone is about to knock on the door. I can feel when something bad has happened. I had a strange vision of my sister-in-law holding a baby and dancing, and told my mum. Weeks later, she announced her pregnancy, and following that it was a girl. I once fell asleep with the oven on. I was pregnant at the time and lying on the sofa. I heard a voice clear as day say, "Rachel, wake up," right next to my face in my ear. It completely startled me, but reminded me that the oven was still on. The thing I'm writing about was an event when I was 14. It was a normal day, but I remember everything so vividly. I was with a group of my friends, all between the ages of 14 to 15. One of my best friends amongst them was called Nathan. We were walking down a busy high street. We were about to pass a small restaurant with lots of tables and chairs outside. Suddenly, time froze for me. I could see them all moving and walking, but I couldn't go anywhere. I could see Nathan walking in front of me past the tables and chairs. Suddenly, a car zooms around the corner, mounts the path, and hits him dead on. I suddenly feel a wave of warmth, and Nathan is back walking in front of me. Without thinking, I lunge forward, grabbing his backpack, pulling him backwards, and toppling us over backwards in the process. Immediately after this, the same car, in the same color, comes jolting around the corner, mounts the pavement, takes out the tables and chairs, and goes through the small windows on the front of the restaurant. My friend Nathan looks at me like he's seen a ghost. He asked me how I did that, and all I can say was, I felt it. I saw it, I don't know. Thankfully, everyone survived with little to no injury. I'd cut my head on the floor as we fell backwards. But later on that day, I was walking in front of Nathan up some stairs. I was quite a few steps ahead of him. I slip on the stairs and have nothing to hold on to. In the 2 seconds I went from walking to slipping backwards, Nathan was there. He wasn't anywhere near me, but suddenly I felt these arms catch me. It was Nathan, and I found myself saying, "How did you do that?" To which he replied, "I felt it." There's been lots of times in my life where I just felt something was going to happen before it did, but nothing as vividly as this. I just wanted to share that, as I completely believe in divine intervention. I'm not sure how or why, but something helped me save his life that day. Thank you so much, and keep up the good work. Rachel Meacher. Thank you so much, Rachel. A truly fascinating story. Our next story comes from Keith, who lives in Bristol. Hi Steve, I just wanted to tell you about my experience a number of years ago at my house early one morning as I came out of my bedroom. I was walking down the corridor towards the bathroom, and I had to go past my twin girls' room. They were about 4 or 5 then. They're now 22. Anyway, as I was walking towards their bedroom, their door was slightly ajar. I swear I saw a shadow on the door. I thought that one of them must be up. As I got to the bedroom, I looked in, and they were both fast asleep, and their nightlight was on. But the light was behind the door, so the shadow shouldn't have been thrown onto it. I was a bit shocked by this, but carried on. The following night, when I put them to sleep, I whispered to myself, "Please take care of them tonight. Thank you." They asked me what I was on about, and I replied that I would tell them one day when they were older. A couple of years later, it was brought up, and I told them what I'd seen, and it's fair to say, it freaked them out a bit. But they said they too had seen the shadow and heard noises in their bedroom. As well as this, objects, mainly keys, would occasionally go missing and turn up in other places. And every now and then, I will see something like movement in the corner of my eye, and I will always say, "Hiya, seen you." My wife is of Jamaican descent, and she says they're called doopies in Jamaica. Keep up the great podcast. I absolutely love it. Thanks for all your hard work. Keith from Bristol in the West Country. Thank you so much, Keith. I would love to find out more about doopies. And now we join Karina in an old mining village in Nottinghamshire. Hello, I recently found your podcast and I enjoy listening to it whilst at work. I love hearing spooky stories and exploring places, especially in the UK, though some of the listener stories really creep me out. I've not really had any face-to-face experiences, but I've included what I have seen or felt. I grew up in a small village called Calverton in Nottinghamshire. It's an old miners' village and known for its spooky stories, haunted pubs, alleged underground tunnels, and ghost-like figures on the main road in and out of the village. Growing up, some of my family used to tell me ghost stories that they'd often see ghostly men walking to the pit. The primary school I went to is Victorian and is pictured in a little museum next to it, which is only open one day a month. I never really experienced anything around the village. However, the house I grew up in, where my mum still lives, had and still has things happen we can't explain. From the age of 3, I had an imaginary friend. She was around the age of 6, wore a white ankle-length dress and had shoulder-length brown hair. I can still picture her face now. She was with me every day at home until I was around 9 when she disappeared. I never really thought anything of it until I was older, took a photo, and saw her behind me. Then it dawned on me that maybe she wasn't imaginary. The doors in the kitchen to both the lounge and the bottom of the stairs have small glass panels in with distorted glass. Multiple times we have seen a shadow walk past, especially in the lounge. I also never felt alone in there, and always had to have a light on. We'd sit downstairs and hear footsteps upstairs, on the creaky floorboards when no one else was at home. We'd hear loud crashes in my bedroom, yet nothing would be out of place. Many times my mum would message me telling me that she was shouting at me to stop making so much noise, before realizing I wasn't even in the house. The TV and radio would also turn on without any of us being near either of them. A couple of friends that stayed over said they'd had weird dreams, and my boyfriend woke one night after feeling a hand on his face to seeing a young girl sitting at the end of my bed. I also saw her once walk from my wardrobe through my bedroom door to the landing and disappear, though I'm still unsure if I was awake or asleep. Somewhere in between, I think. Things would fall from worktops, having not been near the edge, and we would constantly lose items just for them to appear later, sometimes hours or days, in a place we'd checked so many times. I moved out 6 years ago, and luckily the girl didn't follow. However, I do still experience a few things. Items still go missing. I can search for days, then they'll appear right in front of me. Not long after we moved in, I couldn't find a specific coat, and I knew I'd brought it to the house. A couple of days of searching, I had a nap. I dreamt of myself going into my bedroom and opening the cupboard in the corner of the room, and there was my coat. I woke from the nap, walked over to the cupboard, opened it, and there was my coat. Smells would drift in from nowhere. The magnolia body lotion my nana would wear, the distinct smell of ferrets and wood shavings. I used to own ferrets, rabbits and hamsters growing up, and occasionally I'd smell mango, though I haven't figured that one out yet. I've also been woken by a woman shouting hello loudly, yet I'm alone. When we had our dog, she would growl at doorways, which was unlike her as she barely barked. That always used to put me on edge. We used to have a camera in the kitchen for our dog, and that would ramp up the movement notifications at night, yet there was nothing there. Occasionally, it would catch a couple of orbs and something flying, but too big to be a fly. I'd simply cleanse the house, and it went away. I had one item thrown at me. I moved out of that room so quickly, but then decided enough was enough. So I went back in and shouted at them to leave the house. Luckily, nothing since then. I often see shadows in my peripheral vision, but when I look, there's nothing there. We lost our dog in January, and I occasionally see a flash of white. I know it's her, and that comforts me, as she was only young, and we miss her so much. I can feel when the house needs a cleanse. The shadows happen more, and I get a heavy feeling. Luckily, some incense, sage, and a good sweep with the doors open calms everything down nicely. I've been into witchcraft from a very young age. Pull tarot, carry crystals, and occasionally scry. Maybe that's why I'm a bit more sensitive to this kind of thing, but who knows? I'm curious about dark magic, but definitely not brave enough to try anything, and especially not an Ouija board. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to read this. There are a few stories out there about Calverton and Nottingham, especially around the castle. Maybe worth a look into. Keep up the amazing podcast. Take care. Karina. Thank you so much, Karina. I'm curious, do you think there is a connection between your imaginary friend and the little girl you saw? And we'll definitely look into the haunts of Calverton. And now, we have come to our final story, which is disturbing to say the least. Our closing story is called The Thing. And no, I just want to add we haven't landed in an Antarctic isolated research station to do battle with something unknown under the ice. And while this story doesn't feature Kurt Russell, it does feature something very strange. Something so indefinable, it could only be called The Thing. We'll let our listener tell the story from here. My experience is 100% true. Took place in Melbourne around 1993. I still remember it vividly. I hadn't experienced anything remotely close to this before and haven't since. This event was so intense and terrifying, I can relive it as if it happened only weeks ago. I was on my overseas experience from New Zealand and about 24 years old at the time. I was a musician and working as a part-time cleaner, and I was living in a tidy, nondescript house in an area called North Caulfield, which I shared with 3 other flatmates. I'd been living in the house for about a year, with no strange or unexplainable events ever occurring. The house did not have any kind of weird or unsettling atmosphere, and none of my flatmates had ever reported anything unusual or paranormal happening. One night, in the early hours of the morning, I was suddenly awoken, and believe me, I was wide awake, with the realization that something was standing in the doorway of my bedroom. The interesting part was, although I couldn't see what it was, my back was to the doorway, I sensed or somehow knew it was part human, part animal. I don't know how I knew this, but I did. If I could describe it better, it was human but more animal-like, a kind of low-level creature. And obviously, the feeling I got from this thing was not friendly nor pleasant. The worst aspect of this experience was that I was also completely paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle. Now I have read about sleep paralysis, etc., but I was absolutely wide awake, and I'm not the kind of person to imagine things. I was not using drugs, nor have I had any history of mental illness or delusions or hallucinations, etc. Anyway, as I lay there completely paralyzed and feeling very frightened, I sensed this thing walk or glide into my room, around to the foot of my bed, and stood next to my bed facing me for a moment. I was terrified to say the least. I still could not see it at all. No shadowy being, nothing. Yet I knew exactly where it was, and I could sense its intentions. Next thing I knew, this entity was suddenly on top of me. I felt an extreme pressure crushing down on me, as if it was trying to get into my body. It wasn't sexual at all. It felt like an attack, or a possession attempt. I didn't know what to do as I was totally paralyzed, so all I could think of doing, because of the pure evil or unpleasantness of this being, was to recite some kind of prayer to try and repel whatever it was. Now, I'm not religious, but I really prayed for the first time in my life. I think I managed to badly recite the first few lines of the Lord's Prayer in my mind. After about 5 seconds, it seemed to lose its energy and just evaporated away, and I could suddenly move again. I was completely shaken and bewildered as to what had just happened, so it took me a long time to eventually fall asleep again. In the morning, I got up to have a shower, and in the bathroom mirror, I noticed 6 large red oval-shaped marks on my chest.
What the hell?
3 on each side, spaced equally apart, about the size of large fingerprints. these eventually faded away over the course of the entire day. They were there for about 12 hours. They weren't scratches or bruises, but red marks. They didn't hurt, but just looked like large red fingerprint marks. The last, and in my mind equally disturbing aspect of this experience, was after I had gotten up and showered the next morning. I went into the kitchen to get my breakfast, where I encountered my flatmate who was getting his breakfast. My flatmate had his back to me, and after I greeted him, he turned his head, looked at me with a very mischievous and slightly sinister smile on his face, and simply replied, "Did the bogeyman visit you last night?" I was instantly alarmed and shocked, but very quickly I replied, "No." He turned back to his task, and nothing more was said of the matter ever again. I was bamboozled as to how he could have possibly known what had happened to me in the wee hours of the morning. In hindsight, I now wish I'd said, "No, but why do you ask?" and got into a conversation. However, my instinct at that moment was that he was somehow behind the attack, and at the time I didn't want him to think he had the power to summon things and send them off to freak out or attack people. I just didn't want to validate or encourage him. I didn't know my flatmate that well. I felt he was a bit odd and had previously mentioned he was into his runes and apparently dark magic, which I didn't think anything of at the time. However, the fact that he somehow knew what had happened to me just put such a very weird twist on an already very weird experience. I often think about that experience, and I sometimes wonder if the reason he asked me that question was because he too had been attacked by this thing. But when I recall the look on his face when he asked me if the bogeyman had visited me, he looked kind of pleased with himself. Nothing else ever happened to me in that house. The atmosphere didn't change. It was just back to normal. I now believe that this thing, whatever it was somehow summoned by my flatmate and sent to frighten me. And when its energy ran out, it returned to wherever it came from. For me, the main takeaway of that unsettling experience was that it left me with no doubt at all that spirits or ghosts or conscious energy or other life forms absolutely exist outside of or independently of a physical body. Best wishes, Sam. And that, dear listeners, is the end of this episode of Listener Stories. But remember, we still have 2 more episodes to go, and with our last one, we have a very special surprise for you. Until that time, be wary of roads you recognize from dreams, old flats in Edinburgh, grey figures in stairwells, and mirrors with an eerie glimmer to them. But more than that, beware at night, in the depth of sleep, because who knows what lurks in the dark while you slumber. But let's face it, there's nothing much more nightmarish at night than the darkest depth of our mind, when we're alone with our worries and unsettled thoughts. The whirring of them far greater than any tentacle of the thing. And with that in mind, we hope these episodes are of some comfort to you in this strange life we live. And if anything strange, eerie should happen to you, then please write in, because the next person to feature in a listener's story episode could be you.